Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this webinar, What's at Stake? Funding for Childcare and Early Learning in 2026. Just to give you an overview of what to expect. First off, we're just so glad you could be here at such a critical moment for childcare and early learning. We're going to start with Anne Hedgepeth from Childcare Aware, who's going to give us a quick overview of the federal funding landscape. Next, you're going to hear from Sarah Rubenfield from First 5 Years Fund, who's going to walk us through the state of play on Capitol Hill. And then we'll hear from Tamar Epps of the National Head Start Association and Daniel Haynes from NACCE on how you can take action. And we are going to save some time for questions at the end. And then also just to get in front of a question that I've heard from a couple of you all. I know that some of you have been wondering if this webinar will be recorded, and the answer is yes, it will be recorded, and we will be following up with an email tomorrow to send to all of you all. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be on our website, and we'll make sure to follow through. And I'm going to kick it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jane. I'm so glad to see so many people have joined us today for this conversation. And the reality is, I think what I'm about to present on is, I hope, actually the least important segment of this webinar, because in a lot of ways, I think what we want to do today is help move us all towards sort of our most important ask right now, which is that we've got to focus Congress on getting the federal appropriations bill for the current fiscal year done by the end of the month. But we would be remiss if we didn't touch on current events in the childcare and early learning system to help set us all up for success for the conversations we need to have over the next few weeks to be persuasive and to successfully fight for childcare and early learning funding for our current fiscal year. The reality is that we've seen a lot of chaos when it comes to, and Jane, I'm going to stick on that first slide for just a minute. We've seen a lot of chaos in the childcare and early learning system over the past 10 days. And there's been a lot going on in terms of states facing challenges, either freezes or delays when it comes to accessing their federal childcare funding, specifically the funding that's available through the Child Care and Development Fund. States have been unable, in many instances, to draw down their CCDF dollars, and it's been for a few different reasons. This all stemmed from some actions taken by the Federal Department of Health and Human Services following a YouTube video making unsubstantiated accusations of fraud in childcare in Minnesota. And the reality is, recently, social services programs have been under a microscope in that state. So this is really an extension of what's been going on and what conversations, lawsuits, and other actions have focused on this state, ranging from food support programs to Medicaid, and now recently, childcare and other programs. But from what was going on in Minnesota, the administration then took steps to include four other states in addition to Minnesota in what they called a freeze in their federal funding for childcare, that CCDF funding, for TANF, and for the Social Services Block Grant. Three funding streams that support childcare and also support other direct services for children and families. They instituted that freeze and asked for additional information from those five states. They're Minnesota, New York, Colorado, California, and Illinois. And because those states couldn't access their funding, they immediately moved forward with a lawsuit where they received a temporary restraining order granting them access again to their funding under those three funding streams, which we understand they have been able to draw down, and they should be able to continue to draw down while their lawsuit goes on. In addition to those five states, all other states are also facing some delays when it comes to drawing down their funds. Specifically, the federal government has asked for additional information for a state to access their dollars, and it has taken extra days for those requests and those information submissions to be processed. States draw down funds on a variety of schedules, and not every state needed to make a request last week. And when states request those funds, they then receive them, and then they disperse those funds to providers through their subsidy or voucher payments, their childcare subsidy or voucher payments. It's also a federal state partnership. And so states are working with some state dollars, though they really do need the largest share comes from federal dollars. So it's critical that they have access to those funds. And what we did see is that we had at least one state who, due to their delay in accessing their federal funds, were not able to make the payments they needed to make to childcare providers last week. They had to delay those payments, which is really concerning. It means providers were directly impacted in at least one state. And we heard from several others who were close. They'd be out of money sooner than they wanted to be, and they might have to make different decisions. It's very concerning, but really what I want to take away from this conversation and these current events is that the last thing we need in this moment is then to run out of federal funding and face some sort of a shutdown at the end of the month when the current funding bill runs out. And that's why it's so critical right now for us as a community to be turning to Congress and focusing on the current year appropriations bill and getting it done by the end of the month, while also making the case for making sure that funds continue to flow to states on schedule, because we don't want to see families, providers, and our communities impacted by stoppages in funding for childcare and early learning. So let's talk a little bit about what we need to make sure happens and how we can talk about some of these intertwined issues as we turn to thinking about our policy asks. And on the next slide, I want to tee up that more than anything, we really all have a job to do right now, which is to make sure that policymakers and leaders understand how important childcare is. It is essential to working families and young children. It's essential to our communities and to our economy. And I cannot stress this enough. It has had a bipartisan, it's been a bipartisan priority and had bipartisan support for decades. And right now, we even have a funding proposal in Congress that has bipartisan support. We've got to get that done to make sure the funds continue to flow. They're approved by Congress and they flow from our federal agency to our state and keep states and keep our child care programs functioning. We also know and just learned, and I think this is really critical as current events come up in conversations. It's critical to stress that even short delays in funding can harm providers, childcare providers, families, and the workforce. So it means that we need our federal agency to, if there's additional guidance needed, to issue it quickly and make it clear, and to also keep those funds flowing. They need to release funds so that states can continue to support their childcare systems. And of course, as we have conversations with policymakers and stress the importance of childcare, when and if we need to address some of the narrative that may be out there about what's happening in states across the country, it's important that we make clear that safeguards exist and those safeguards are in place, and we can work with states to ensure funding is delivered efficiently and responsibly. But those funds do need to be released to states to ensure the strength and stability of our childcare and early learning system. So while current events, I think, have really caused a lot of attention on childcare, we are still seeing challenges for states as they try to draw down their dollars. The last thing we want is for there to be an issue getting this appropriations bill across the finish line and to face further or additional challenges in federal support for childcare and early learning. And so we have a real job to do when we think about what we talked to the Hill about and how we position our next steps in terms of policy and advocacy. But we know what to say. We have to make the case for childcare, and we also know that there's good reason to make the case for ensuring funds flow to states in a timely manner. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Sarah to really turn us to thinking about the Hill and what's next when it comes to making our case to policymakers.
Thanks so much, Anne. So I'm going to touch on today, how does this all connect with what is currently going on in Congress? All of the latest focus on childcare by the administration and in the media, it does mean that there's increased attention on the Hill by lawmakers. We know that in the span of the next month, we will see 5 congressional hearings, ranging from focusing specifically on childcare to much broader concerns of fraud in Minnesota. And with all this extra attention, we know lawmakers are more focused on childcare, but it also provides us this opportunity to redouble our efforts to lift up the tremendous importance of families having access to quality care and how federal programs and investment are vital to ensuring this access. We must stay focused on building on the strong bipartisan support for childcare, as Anne mentioned, that we've seen through the years, and not let concerns of fraud or partisanship take away or erode this support. So it's important that, while fraud is getting a lot of attention, it's important that we really try to drown out the narrative of fraud by focusing on the strong stories we have to tell about why childcare programs are so important. Why federal childcare programs are important to supporting and nurturing our youngest learners to give them a strong start in life, why they're important to supporting hardworking families and the amazing providers caring for our children, and why they're so important to our local economies. And the timing couldn't be more critical. As Anne mentioned, and as many of you know, the next funding deadline for federal child care and early programs like CCDBG and Head Start is just around the corner on January 30th. So we know that lawmakers are working to finalize how much funding they will provide for their programs this week. And again, now is the time to remind them just how important these programs are and the need for strong investments. And with all the recent attention on childcare, lawmakers are eager to know more. They're asking questions like, how is childcare working in my state or district? And what are the impacts of these programs? And it's our job to make sure they know. So it's impactful to share the powerful stories, lift up those local voices while also highlighting the impact. Things like emphasizing the local impact while also highlighting the broader reach of the program, such as CCDBG serving nearly 1.5 million children, and explaining how states use this funding to support access to childcare for families with low incomes through vouchers or subsidies, but also how the program ensures parents have quality, safe options for their children, and that there is strong oversight already in place. It's also important to emphasize how families are struggling with the high cost of everything these days. With affordability top of mind for everyone, it's critical that we explain how CCDBG helps make childcare more affordable, and that instead of paying $13,000 a year or over $1,000 a month for childcare on average, CCDBG makes it possible for families to pay closer to $3,400 a year or $284 per month. Although we know these are just averages, and of course they vary widely by state, with some parents paying nothing. But sharing these facts and figures coupled with voices and faces of local stories can be incredibly impactful. On the next slide, you'll see we also want to emphasize the importance of Head Start, which provides essential care and services to families in every single congressional district, and highlight how the program collaborates with parents to best meet the unique needs of the children, families, and local communities they serve. But also emphasizing that Head Start program serves over 650,000 children nationwide. And again, the program is in 435 congressional districts, which means every single one of them. So what exactly are we asking for? You'll see on the next slide that, again, we know lawmakers are in the middle of negotiating funding for childcare and early learning programs that are included in a bill known as the Labor HHS Appropriations Bill. So our ask is for Congress to protect and prioritize funding for childcare and early learning when passing the Senate's FY26 Labor HHS Appropriations Bill. Now, you might be wondering why the Senate. So the Senate version of the bill this year was much better than the House version, the House version provided cuts or elimination of some programs. So we're asking Congress to pass the Senate version of the Labor H Appropriations Bill because it protects funding for key programs like PDG, C Campus, and IDEA, and it also provides modest increases for CCDBG and Head Start. And to be clear, we know that larger increases are needed and we're not going to get everything we need in this one opportunity. But the Senate bill is what's on the negotiating table at the moment, and we need to quickly work to make sure that that is what ends up in the final package. Of course, our work will continue into the next funding bill, however, for FY27, and I know we'll have more to come on that. In addition to our top ask for the FY26 Senate Labor H Appropriations Bill, as Anne mentioned, we want to also encourage lawmakers to work with HHS and the Administration for Children and Families to ensure disbursement of CCDF funding to states without further disruption, while parents in partnership with states as they can deliver CCDF funding efficiently and responsibly. So that's where we are in a nutshell. We need to make sure that they pass this year's Labor H appropriations bill before the January 30th deadline. And we also need to ensure state funding is flowing to states and efficiently and responsibly. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tamar with the National Head Start Association to talk about timing and some great tools for how best to take action. Tamar?
Yes. So, as Sarah articulated earlier, with the funding deadline being January 30th, the time for action is now. We will be having our Tell the Hill week from January 15th to the 23rd, with the expectation that the House will be finalizing the LHHS bill as of next week, hopefully. And it is also the last week that the House will be in session before the CR expires on January 30th. We will be having our day of action on January 20th, where you can talk to your members of Congress and send them a message about the importance of Head Start and early learning programs and in childcare, which Sarah and Ann are articulated. And on January 28th, we will be having our fly-in day for the National Head Start Association for our Head Start advocates on the call. It is our Winter Leadership Institute. So you can also talk to your members of Congress about the importance of Head Start and early learning programs there as well. And next slide. So on this slide, we have our talking points in our toolkit. You can find the talking points and toolkit in the QR code. Essentially, we want to articulate that childcare is essential to working families. We want to articulate the importance of childcare and early learning to your community, to states, and to your district. And we want to also urge Congress to prioritize and protect childcare investments and continue to build on efforts of increasing access and affordability to childcare and ensure that families get the services that they deserve. And I will turn it over to my colleague Daniel to talk about how you can make your voice heard.
Thanks, Timar. Really appreciate everything that's been shared on this call so far, and want to particularly echo what Sarah said about the importance of storytelling in helping make this make our voices heard, as Tamar said as well. We've made that really easy for you. We've created tools to share your stories with us as we're connecting with members of Congresses and offices. But we've also shared some tools right here to directly contact your member of Congress. And I will say, from conversations that we've had on the Hill as early as as recently as this week, we've heard from members about just how important it is for them to hear directly from their constituents about the importance of these programs as they are making these funding decisions. So not only should you be taking the time to contact your members of Congress directly, either using our action tools or by phoning into the Capitol, you should also be sharing this information with your network, your family, your friends, other educators in your program, other educators in your network, and encouraging them to contact your member of Congress as well. And I'll just echo what Tamar said, that these actions are far more impactful if we are doing them together and if Congress is hearing from all of us at once. So I really encourage you to take up the drumbeat, share these actions, share these priorities, share these opportunities during our week of action, and especially during our day of action on January 20th. These decisions are being made really quickly, and they need to hear from us, because if you're not at the table helping inform and influence decisions, we are less likely to get the secured funding we need, and we're less likely to change the harmful narratives that exist right now. We can go to the next slide. Also, just share a few more tools that make it really easy for you to contact your member of Congress right now. And I encourage folks to use the QR codes on this next slide to go ahead and send a message now. All of our organizations have very quick grab and go actions. You can insert your name, where you live, and this will send direct messages to your members of Congress aligned with the need to strengthen funding and prioritize funding for child care and learning programs, including CCDBG and Head Start. So I encourage everyone to take just a few minutes now to send one of these actions, and I think we're about to turn it over to Q&A.
Thanks, Daniel. And we are, I think, going to bring everyone back on video while we do some Q&A. And I know not everyone has access to the Q&A right now, so Jane is troubleshooting that to make sure everyone can get access. But in the meantime, we had a couple of questions come in the start of the event. So the first one we wanted to ask was about funding freezes. There's been a lot in the news about funding being frozen. Is it still frozen? What's going to happen if after the court order's over and will funding refreeze? Should I be worried about my state's ability to pay out for subsidy? Feel free, any of you that want to hop in and take that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I want to acknowledge this is a really fluid situation. Even today, states were providing updates on their status, on their ability to draw down their federal dollars. There are a few things I'll just acknowledge about the state of play is that five states who received communication that they had a full freeze on their CCDF or child care dollars, their TNF dollars, and their social services block grant dollars are now able to access their dollars under a court order by a judge. That order is in place for 2 weeks, and the actual arguments in the underlying lawsuit will happen during that time. We'll find out if either someone prevails in the lawsuit or if the restraining order needs to be extended. But those five states do have access to their own funds. In addition, all other states have had to go through some additional steps when they need to draw down their dollars. Not every state has tried, but those who have are starting to be able to access their funds. They've had to provide additional information. They've faced delays, or it's taken longer than they might have expected, but they are beginning to receive their drawdowns. We believe that means funding is flowing, but those delays may be persistent. And this is where your state agency or your state administration is managing that process and figuring out how to make sure that they get the funds in the door and they're able to make those payments to childcare providers in the subsidy system to keep the lights on and to keep kids in those classrooms. We're going to continue to monitor at Child Care of America any changes in that status. And we don't think delays are good. We really do want ACF to get those funds to states. That needs to happen while we also work on getting this funding bill passed. So both things are top of mind for me. But I think the status right now is that funds are flowing from the federal government, federal funds for childcare, to states, though some states are experiencing some delays in getting those into their accounts. So stay tuned. Child Care of America is keeping our website updated with the information we have, and we know that things could change as more states try to access their dollars. So keep us posted if you hear things as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Anne. Another one we had, and I think this might be a good one for the whole group, but even if I'm in a blue state and my members are all Democrats, is it still worth me reaching out about appropriations? I don't know
I'm
if
happy to take
maybe.
this one. I will say absolutely. It is always important to reach out. And it oftentimes, sometimes it can be about exactly what you're reaching out, or, even if you know that your member is supportive and they're right there with you, a lot of this is about just developing that relationship with your lawmakers and those that represent you. So they know exactly who you are, you know exactly who they are. You build that relationship up over time because we don't know what's around the next corner. And you never know when you need to call your members of Congress and have them help advocate for something or help you with something. And so even if you think your member already agrees with you and supports funding and they say, yeah, we agree. I think it's just incredibly helpful to keep up that relationship with your lawmakers and just make sure that they know who you are, who you serve in their community, what the impact is, and how it all connects to the critical funding that they are supportive of.
Nice. And then we've heard a lot about fraud in the news. A lot of people talking about fraud in the childcare system, fraud in social service system. Assuming that they reach out to their members of Congress, what are some good ways to push back on that messaging?
I can jump in here first, and feel free to chime in after. I will say for the average person reaching out to their member of Congress, I want to reiterate what Olive's been saying. I don't think fraud is a narrative that you need to be responsible to address head on. If you benefit from childcare subsidy dollars, family or as an educator, it's good enough and strong enough to talk about the good work that money does, because talking about the positive benefits of these dollars actually helps counteract that harmful fraud narrative in and of itself. The more they can associate these dollars, this spending, these decisions they're making with real positive impacts in their states and communities, the more we are going to overwhelm what is, I want to reiterate, a unsubstantiated fraud narrative with real meaningful change and driving real meaningful support to the system.
I couldn't agree more with Daniel's point, and also that what we really want to make sure we drive home with all policymakers is the critical importance of childcare and early learning from whatever seat you sit in. And as I mentioned early on, to the extent that you get the chance to dig in with your decision maker and you're asked to be responsive, we really want folks to feel comfortable knowing that there are safeguards in place in the childcare system and an opportunity for ACF to continue or the federal government to continue to work with states to get this right without freezing funding, without punishing families, providers, or harming our childcare system. And Congress can take action now to keep funding flowing while we continue to work through any challenges that may arise in conversations around program accountability or integrity. So I think we can do our best job in focusing on what's in front of Congress right now. They've got to get this funding bill done, and they need to know how important childcare is to you, to your community, to our economy as a whole, whether you're a parent, a provider, or someone who just sees the benefits of childcare and early learning in your community.
The only other thing I would add, and I agree with everything that Daniel and Ann said, is that oftentimes I find it helpful to say fraud is unacceptable. And we want to make sure funding is going to the families that are eligible and that need these services. And then it provides a great opportunity to continue to talk about and lift up the positive impact of these programs and districts, as Daniel suggested.
And then we, not in the not too distant past, had a government shutdown. And I think especially a lot of Head Start programs felt that shutdown pretty deeply. So how worried are we of another shutdown, and what, if anything, can folks do to prepare if there is a short-term funding lapse?
I'm
You know,
happy to.
oh, go, Tamara, you're good.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one and then someone could build off of it. But from what we're hearing is that the Congress is set to finalize the FY 2026 process late next week. We're not expecting a government shutdown. If I think it's very unlikely at this point if they don't finalize FY 2026 LHHS bill. What we're also hearing is that there could be a potential CR. So I don't think that's going to happen. That's not something that we're currently concerned about. What we're asking for is that Congress finalize this process and emphasize the importance of passing the Senate's version of the LHHS bill that called for increases in CCDBG, Head Start, and level funding for the Preschool Development Fund.
Yeah, and I sort of feel like this is our moment, right? To also make sure we get to that funding before the end of the month so that we don't face a shutdown. So I really appreciate that. One of the best ways we can prepare is by having a strong offense right now and making the case for getting the funding done.
Excellent. All right. I know we're coming up on time. I don't think we're able to fully resolve our Q&A technical problem, which we apologize for. We do want to make sure everyone gets a chance. If you do have questions, to feel free to reach out. You all should have Jane's email, as that was the email that the invite came from. But just in case, her email is jfillion@ffyf.org. Please feel free to reach out if you do have any additional questions. As Jane said, we will make this webinar available. And I don't know if Jane, maybe we want to throw the QR code slides back up there one more time. That way folks, as they want to take actions for the end of the year, can.
So if I can take a point of privilege on just one more action folks can take right now, I would appreciate, I'm going to drop in, actually, I can't access the chat. I'll send it Jane to follow up after. Macy's latest ECE workforce survey is out in the field right now. And in addition to these incredible actions, this is a great opportunity to make your voice heard. If you are an early educator, a provider working in a program in any setting, talk about the conditions your program is facing and help shape national narrative and advocacy around childcare and early learning, both in terms of funding and appropriations conversations, but also to influence broader conversations around federal and state policies. So we'll share that link and we can share it out after, but very much appreciate folks taking a moment to engage and share their perspective. Our research is always stronger when it's informed by the field.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Looks like we actually did it in the time we said we were going to do it, which we're very proud of ourselves. So again, sign up, take those actions to let your lawmakers know how important this funding is. And I appreciate everyone's time today, and I'm sure we'll hear from all of you soon. Have a good one.